Hello and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we have the Nick Simmons. Good afternoon, good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. I love you call me the Nick Simmons when actually I'm friendly with another Nick Simmons.
Well, I mean, surely you're the original Nick Simmons, right? You're
Only in my house.
well, your truth is your truth, and that's fine. We'll just stick to that. So that's cool. Listen, just to let people know who we have today. So my guest today is the Nick Simmons, the founder of Dynamic Coaching, Conscious Communication, Hidden Solutions, and Work in Progress. All of these methodologies fuse learning from neuroscience and psychology with his own new ideas to improve communication, clarity, and creativity. Nick has worked in the area of personal and professional development for over 20 years after a career in entrepreneurship, which started at the age of 18. Nick is passionate about learning how the human brain works and how that translates into our everyday experiences, producing differing results and how we can improve them. Wow. Nick, like I say, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. 20 years in personal development, that's a long time, right?
Yes, well, I'm feeling very old, so
No pressure, no pressure.
I had a big birthday very recently, and I'm feeling it.
Oh, there you go. Well, listen, congratulations. So tell me, where does your passion lie? I mean, you've covered a lot of areas there, and I love that from your introduction there. There's a lot of stuff, and I'm sure we're going to go down lots of rabbit holes here. But where does your passion lie, Nick?
So I would suggest the answer to the question in my life now, differently when I was younger, but definitely now, it's about learning and understanding. And I love the revelation that we get from learning something new, and particularly when it's related to ourselves, going, oh, that's why I do so and so and so and so. And I think particularly as I'm getting older, recognizing the significance of my early life, I mean, really very early life, very young childhood, and how that created the person that I became, and unconsciously programmed my behavior that I thought was, that's the way I am. But now I recognize it isn't the way I am. It's just what led me to do what I did. It's that differentiation between who we are and what we do.
Okay. Where did that gap start appearing? Where did the gap between who you are and who you truly are, if that makes sense?
Well, I'd suggest it happens really, really young. That, I have vivid memories of being a teenager and a young teenager, and how important it was to fit in. And I think for most teenagers, it's a massive priority. And that whole fitting in, and that everything from what we wore to what bands we liked, and very importantly, who we hated. That was as important. We had to hate ABBA, and was that truly what I felt, or was it because I was influenced by the people who I wanted to ingratiate myself with, the cool kids?
Did you need that connection, that external connection, that sort of somebody to resonate or to bounce against to find yourself?
Okay, so now that's interesting, because I'm one of three boys, and the middle one, you can tell from the chip on both shoulders. And there's only 10 and a half months between myself and my elder brother. Wow. Yes, I'm used to people doing the calculation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And whatever you think, I'm clearly the innocent party in this. But so, with less than a year between myself and my brother, and then there's 4.5 years between my younger brother. So for those, there's certainly the 4.5 years, and probably the next couple, because when my younger brother was just a toddler, we didn't pay him much attention. It wasn't, not for playing with, not for comparison. So I was forever comparing myself with my older brother, and he's bigger than I am, because I wasn't cooked. That's why they induced me, because they didn't know when I was due. They didn't have scans in those days. Anyway, I'm nearly over it, nearly. So I was always comparing myself and always wanting to be equal to, as good as. And, I can recognize that now. But the little Nick, he didn't know that. He was just trying to sort of carve his own niche in the world. But anyone who's particularly a middle child, I have such affinity to middle children. We all suffered in the same way. That whole idea of the first one is definitely special, and the younger one's the baby. And well, who are you? Well, you're just the one who clears up the mess between both of them normally. And so I do think that was a very significant influence in creating the person and the priorities that I felt I had as a youngster. When I grew up, I grew up in the age of, at school, we were in the 60s and the 70s, where, you had top of the class and bottom of the class, and comparisons were an acceptable way of teaching people. We've moved on from there, but some of us still carry the scars. And, it went all the way to O-levels. We had O-levels in those days, proper exams. And my brother took, I can't remember how many, it was 8, 9 or 10. And he passed them all with A's and got a B, I think. And the year he did that, I had the mocks, and it was 1976, which, so you don't recognize the significance of 1976 because you're young. But in 1976, it's famous for the heat wave that we had in the UK. And I did pretty well in the heat, which is ironic because I don't do now, but then I did. And clearly I did well in my mocks against the average because people suffered in the heat. So I'm blithely went into my O-levels thinking, well, I'll do what Adam did, my older brother. And I ended up with 1B. No, sorry, they take it back. 1C, and the rest were D's and E's, which in those days were considered a fail. And that was a real shock and a wake-up call to me. And the irony now of being driven by learning compared to how I was when I was at school, I was minimally, not much interested in learning. But I think that was very much because I don't like being told. Okay. And when I left school and could decide whether I wanted to learn and what I wanted to learn, that's when it became far more interesting to me. And I started doing what we would now call self-directed learning, and did it and enjoyed doing it on my own terms.
Do you think that was a control trait? Almost like a middle child hangover. You know, don't tell me what to do. I control my own life.
Can you repeat the question? Because the line went a bit
Yeah,
iffy.
sure. I'm just saying, do you think it was a control trait? Just I suppose with being the middle child, that actually, not wanting to be told what to do. You want to be in control of your own destiny as such.
I've not considered it before in those terms, and that resonates quite a lot. Yeah, I'd say I do have a strong independence trait, for want of a better word. And I remember saying as a younger person, the thing that I think my parents gave me that I most valued was my independence. I was going to school on the tube at the age of 11, which nowadays would put you in jail for child
neglect.
That's the word. But then seemed okay. I say 11. I think it was actually maybe younger. I can't remember so long ago.
Well, I mean, you used to be able to lie in the parcel shelf in the car and without a seatbelt or anything. So we used to be able to do lots of things. I think smoke on airplanes.
Yes.
Pretty much sit anywhere in the car, with or without a seatbelt. So there's life's
yeah. Well, I do remember. I certainly remember getting on the tube and having to avoid the smoking carriage. Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? It is very mad. So tell me, what does fire in the belly mean to Nick?
So it's a lovely metaphor, and I'm really into metaphor and the power of metaphor. And there's two things that it takes me to. One is the power of motivation, which is obviously a cognitive thing. But there's a desire to overcome any obstacles. It's that fabulous Goethe quote, the boldness as the genius in it. But the other thing with the fire in the belly thing for me that gives me an image is that I've been fortunate, is an interesting word to use, fortunate to do a number of firewalks. And the wonderful thing about a firewalk is that scientists can't explain it. There is no rational reason why your skin doesn't burn when you walk across 1,000-degree burning hot coals. And the weird thing is, because I've done lots and lots of them as part of different courses, if your mind's not in the right place, you burn. And if your mind is in the right place, you walk straight across. And that just doesn't make sense. You can't argue for it. And it reminds me of how much we've yet to learn and yet to know. And just that whole, every single generation since history has been recorded, and probably before then, but every one of them has been at the cutting edge of knowledge. And the further we've gone on in civilization with humanity is that the more we can look back and we can see with certainty how things have happened and so on. And Daniel Kahneman's really keen on this point about, and the word has just gone out of my head, I'll hopefully it will come back to me, begins with a C, of congruence, of making sense of what's gone on. And yet, when we look forward into the future, we can't do that because there is no certainty about what's happening in the future. And we don't know those areas that we don't know things about. For example, we don't know where ideas come from. We don't know why does, if you hear a joke, if somebody else told us both a joke, why would maybe us both laugh, or maybe one of us laugh, why none of us laugh? Why is it that happens? We don't know that. And so there's so much that we don't yet know, and it almost seems to be anti-human to embrace that stuff we don't know. We seem to be so focused on what we know, and I find it really interesting, because we're now in the internet generation where things have changed so much about the way that we relate to knowledge. A friend of mine's daughter just been taking medical exams, and their exams have changed completely. A few years ago, it was all about knowing what symptoms led to what disease so we could do an accurate diagnosis. You don't have to remember anything anymore because the exams are all based, everyone's got a computer, you're presented with a set of symptoms, a patient, you can look everything up because that's the real world. We can look everything up. The skills now are all about noticing. That's the key thing. So our relationship to information is different now in the last 10 years, maybe even less probably, than it's ever been. Yet we still teach our children, to remember facts about history and don't get me started. I'm not going to talk too much about education, but we've got a Victorian education system for the digital age.
We're in that sort of cycle of life, aren't we? I mean, they now talk about big data, and we've never had so much access. So it's not a case of, getting the information. It's now a case of how do you quickly assimilate the right information or the most correct, put it that way, information. So as you say, it's thankfully no longer a memory test, because I wasn't very good at memory tests. But actually it's more interpretation and all the variances and deviations from that.
And recognize it's interesting you use the word interpretation, because it's so open to different interpretations and being able to navigate through information to find the best potential answer rather than either hypothesizing with certainty and going, it's this. We don't know. We really don't know. Which is, as for me, one of the things that I'm really interested in is producing clarity for people. One of the things that that drives me is I want to be as clear as possible about things, and I also want to communicate with clarity, and I want to understand. And that's what's driven one of the 4 areas that I'm focusing on in my work. Go on, you've got a question.
Why is clarity important?
Because for me, I always felt as a teenager, not always, very often felt misunderstood. And the conscious communication model has at its heart what we call authentic understanding. And I believe that the purpose of communication is to produce authentic understanding. And what I mean by that is that the idea that I have in my head is transferred into your head, and you understand what I've said in the way that I understand it. And interestingly, now we're on a podcast with, I don't know how many thousand people will listen to it, but I'd also like them to understand what I have to say, that it authentically, not. And so I've stopped saying, you hear people often say, oh yeah, I understand what you mean. I try never to say the phrase. The phrase I use is, I have an understanding of what you're saying. And there's a huge difference. It creates an opening for people to go, so what do you understand? And then I can repeat, and I say, so I think it's this, this, and this. And they go, yeah, not quite. And then we can go in a little deeper and understand, because when we do get that authentic understanding, which is the clarity that I'm after, that's what allows the connection to happen between two people. So clarity is important, because it leads to connection for me.
So that connection is, if I've understood you correctly, is the ability to, as you say, either align in understanding or in values, or to communicate with this on the same premise.
I love the word align. Yeah.
Why does align resonate with you?
Because it's another way of saying what I'm talking about. It's where my understanding is the same as your understanding. That's what I understand by align. And so if I said, so I have a really strong value around integrity. So you're nodding and you have an understanding of integrity. But until we both define integrity, we don't know whether they mean the same thing.
Yeah.
And I would argue, so many times you go in to see a client and, you get a brief, and it doesn't matter what you're doing in to see a client and get a brief. There's an unspoken rule in business, is that whatever the client tells you is the problem is never the problem. And I think it's often because the client isn't clear on what the problem is. They only see the symptom, not the problem. Or it may be that they don't yet trust you enough to tell you the real problem. That's also stuff that happens. But I cannot tell you. I can tell you exactly the number of times it hasn't happened, and that answer is 1. In every other time I've gone into a client, we've discovered the initial problem was not the problem.
Do you think when we get out of alignment, do you think there is a connection there between alignment with ourselves, our true selves, if you like, and our own values, and yet where we find ourselves in life? Do you think that there is a connection there? So we're, by de facto, we're actually trying to find ourselves. So we're trying out all these little alleyways and seeing what fits. And you're there as master facilitator in a way.
I think it's a very wise observation, in that it's like two pulls in direction. One is to be in alignment with ourselves and our values, and the other is to fit in with others. And others, by definition, have their own values and their own thing. And of course, everyone else is also in this same battle of trying to be authentic to themselves and fitting in with others, and be in relationship to others. And I think it goes back. I do think it matters the time of life you're in, so that when you're, when we're really young and we're looking up to the adults, and we have this concept of right and wrong, and the adults tell us what's right. And so often we get, certainly for myself, I got told a lot, no. Evidently, it was my first word as a child. No, this is all a consequence of that. And so, we're always trying to identify and understand our way in the world. And I'm fascinated with that whole first few years and how that impacts their interpretation and understanding of the world. God, I wish I could go back and bring up my own children again with the understanding I have now, rather than the understanding I had as a younger man. But they turned out all right, but I could have done much better by them with my current understanding. But that childhood thing where we are looking to others to be the authority, that turns into that teenage rebellion against being whatever, I can't get the phrase, we're having authority over us, so we want to have autonomy, and therefore we need to rebel against the way that things were. So the way that we relate very much depends on where we are in our life. And as you get older, and when you're creating a career, you need to fit in, and you need to learn how things are done around here. And so you learn the way that the organization is. And, I remember working for a company. I won't name names because I'm not going to tell a very nice story about them. But they would lie as their first response. So if, for example, the phone rang and it was for somebody who was ill, they wouldn't say, oh, unfortunately, that person's not well today. Can I take a message? They would say they're on training. Why? They would, at every case, lie first, truth not even second, a long way from second. I didn't stay there very long, I have to let you know. Though, yeah, unfortunately, I was of an age where I can recognize I don't like the way these people work. I'll go somewhere else. But when you start your first job, I mean, I started my first job at 16 after I had that debacle with my O levels. Very impressionable. People say this is the way it is. Well, that's the way it is. And you learn things. I mean, I went into sales and I learned some very not questionable, awful, let's be honest, techniques to influence people and to manipulate them in order to buy certain products. And I look back now with shame. It was appalling. Maybe I needed to do that to recognize it with some hindsight. And funny enough, I remember in certain jobs being stressed all the time, but not knowing why I was stressed. Now I can recognize it's because I was being asked to live and be the face of something that I was completely against. So all of that comes back to this whole situation that allowed me to recognize, 20 odd years ago now, that doing things for other people to fit their things, that whole, the line, if you can please everybody or you can please yourself. When you recognize who you are and what's important to you, which the vast majority of people, in my experience, do not understand. Most people do not understand what their values are. Most people do not understand what values are as a grounding piece. Why we are not teaching this to children, I cannot understand. But when you discover this stuff and you realize what's important to you as an individual, it can free you to make far better decisions for yourself. So that's go back. And values, being clear on your values, is critical element of that clarity that matters to me.
Of interest, what age or what stage of your life do you think you had, or did you realize, let's say, full and total control? You had the keys, it was all you, nobody else.
I would say it has nothing to do with my age and everything to do with a course that I went on that woke me up. And if I'd have gone on that course 10 years earlier or 10 years later, I may well have had the same experience. So I don't think it was down to me. It was, I didn't have an epiphany. I was given an epiphany.
Can you explain that? Sorry, I'm not sure I fully understand.
Sure. So I had, how many years ago was it? 1996 it was. I'll tell you exactly when it was. When I went on a personal development course that was called Outlook. And on it, there's a number of exercises and experiences you're put through that allows you to see yourself and the way that you operate in a way that I'd never experienced before. And it was a massive wake-up call. And, it was really the thing that lit me up inside. We'd had a massive event in our lives so I went on that in 96, so I was 30 something. But the most significant event of my life before that, well, you could certainly say before that, maybe forever, was there was a 6-month period where first of all, my father died. And secondly, our younger son was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And the way that my wife and I dealt with it was to focus in. We didn't go and look for support from anyone else. Well, we did, but Scope were, let's say, they didn't support us in a way that we felt was useful for us. And to be fair to them for a moment, Aaron is relatively minimally disabled. But at the point at which he was diagnosed at the age of 2, he wasn't walking and he wasn't talking. And we didn't know whether he ever would. And we have friends of friends who had a daughter with cerebral palsy who was very disabled. And we couldn't get our head around the fact that our son had the same same condition as Madeline, because Madeline was very disabled. But Aaron, we didn't even notice for 14, 15 months he was disabled because he was just a baby. But the way that we dealt with it was we did whatever we could for him, and we treated him as you know, we didn't like to give in to the disability. We didn't treat him any differently to any other children. So if he wanted to play football, he played football. He fell over a lot. There's a lovely story when because he wanted, like every sensible boy, that's just a fun bit of judgment there. I know I'm judging, but most of us, when we were little, we wanted to grow up and be a footballer, didn't we? Yep, good. I'm glad you're nodding. I certainly did, and Aaron the same. Wanted to be a footballer. And my wife said to him once, I don't know how old he was, 4, 5, 6, I don't know. She said, you know, Aaron, if for any reason you couldn't be a professional footballer, what would you like to be instead? And he thought for a moment, and he went, I think I'll be a rugby player. And so we left him to it. Okay, we choose your sport then, fine. And in fact, what happened many years later, he started playing wheelchair basketball and did very well playing that, played for the country. Never quite got to the Paralympics, unfortunately, but he changed direction. But the point about that was such a significant life event that was, like every parent of a disabled child, not on our radar. We always assumed that, you know, our children would be able-bodied, and it definitely changes you.
Do you think things happen for a reason?
No. No, that's exactly the congruence that Daniel Kahneman talks about. Is okay, human beings love it. We love to come up with a reason why. And I'm sorry, I do not believe that. And can you imagine for a moment that was the case? That there was this almighty powerful being that said, Nick needs to learn a lesson. What we'll do is we'll give him this child we'll give him a disabled child. Why did my son need to be disabled for me to learn a lesson? No, I'm sorry. I cannot live with that. That's not the case. I could live with the case that Aaron chose to be disabled and come into the world going, you know what? I can do this. I can do living fine. Make it a bit more challenging. I'll have a handicap. Potentially, if we want to believe that the spirit can choose its mode in this world, which, as I said earlier, it's a possibility. It's not one I believe in, but I'm open to its possibility.
It's a fascinating question, if you like, or a fascinating place to think about, you know, as to where we're at. You know, why do things happen? You know, is it coincidence? Is it synchronicity? Is it alignment? You know.
No, I think, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm a bit more practical. There's a fact, and I can't give you the stats behind it to prove it. So, but I was told by a very good neuroscientist whose name I can't remember. You know, I read it somewhere, that 95% of all the brain's activity is unconscious. And when you consider that, as well as, you know, we're talking, our brains are also running our bodies, and, you know, they're not bothering to tell us, you know, shall I up the oxygen level when you start talking more passionately, Nick? No, it just gets on with it. So there's loads and loads of things that the brain is doing that we don't know about. And if we're only conscious of 5% of what we're doing, and maybe it's not what we're doing because of all the stuff that happens underneath, but we're only conscious of a percentage of what we're doing, I think a lot of things happen that we're unaware of, and they lead to things that happen. And then we go, well, how did that happen? Not realizing it was something we did without knowing about it.
And that's super interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, I mean, that 95-5, you know, 5% is conscious behavior, 95 subconscious. So potentially you are, you know, this is why they say it, your language is so important, is be careful what you wish for, you know, or careful what you're not wishing for at the same time. It's because that is an instruction, right, to the subconscious mind.
Yep. I'm also not sure that I believe in the subconscious.
Okay.
Certainly we know there's stuff that's conscious and unconscious. I certainly don't know enough to say it's this or that, but you know, interesting, for someone who named one of his programs Conscious Communication, I don't profess a great deal of knowledge in consciousness. Ahil Seth is your man for that. But what I mean when I'm talking about conscious communication, it means communication that we are aware of. That's what I mean by conscious. We're aware of it. And there's so much communication that we're unaware of. Like you made a little gesture with your mouth just then. Were you aware of that?
Oh, I am now.
Yeah. And the thing is, I and anyone else who's watching, if they noticed it, can interpret that movement you made with your mouth in many different ways, and then take the conversation in a certain direction. And it goes back to this point you said, you know, does it happen for a reason? Yeah, because something happened, but because we didn't know what happened, because we're unconscious. We're unconscious most of the time. I mean, I have a friend who's a very good driver. She's a very good driver. And a little while ago, pre-lockdown, pre-everything, she drove into a skip, a stationary skip. So she says she's a very good driver. The skip tells a different story. What do you believe? I personally believe the skip because it's fact. So, and it, you know, I do find it interesting, you know, this thing about what a fact is. That's now an incredible discussion to have, what a fact is. But again, that's not my area of either specialism or, frankly, great knowledge. What I'm interested in is the gift we've got between our ears, understanding how that works so that we can use it as effectively as possible.
Well, over the 20 odd years, you've been studying sort of personal development for yourself, and I'm sure to teach and to pass on. I mean, what have you learned? You know, what fresh ideas do you think you've come up with through that time? What have you learned?
So there's a couple of things. Are you familiar with Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow?
No, I don't believe so.
So Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel winner. He won the prize for economics, which is a heck of a achievement for someone who is not an economist. He's a psychologist and known as the father of behavioral economics. And he, along with his partner Amos Tversky, who sadly died very young, they came up, or in fact, they didn't come up with the idea. There are a couple of other psychologists, one whose name is Staninov or something, sorry, Keith, and somebody else came up with this principle to describe how the brain works. They called it System 1 and System 2, where System 1 involves thinking very fast, quickly, and System 2 is slower. And I can demonstrate this to you by asking you a couple of questions. Can I do that? You're going to need to, so I'll ask you two questions. Your job is to answer them as quickly as possible. I promise you there's no trick questions. I'm not trying to trick you. I just want to show you something. But as well as answering the questions, can you watch your thought process? Because I want to ask you a question about it afterwards.
Okay.
Okay. So are you ready?
I am.
Good. That's not one of the questions. First question is, what is 2 times 2?
2 times 2 is 4.
Thank you. Correct. And what is 17 times 24?
Oh, Lordy. A lot. 17 times 24. 408, I believe.
Excellent. Perfect. Yep, absolutely correct. Well done. Tell me then, what was the difference? What happened internally with answering the 2 different questions?
That's what, for me, I almost step up to a virtual blackboard and almost have to write it out, have to visualize it. And then for me, I actually have to look at it on the board to understand the symbol. 2. I hear the 2 numbers, and then what I've got to do with the numbers. And then, so I would say 2 times 2 is a muscle. It's a muscle memory, from primary school. 2 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6. So that's, repeated, beaten into us, literally. And but the other one, you actually have to go through a process, right? So it has to be brought into a conscious process and multiply a part of it, hold it there, go through this. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of what I have to do it. So I have to reproduce it on a sort of a virtual piece of paper in my head and then start the calculus.
Lovely. Thank you. It was a perfect response. Do you also know, what did you say from the moment I asked you the question, 17 times 24, what did you verbalize from that point on? Do you remember what you said?
Oh, crikey, I think was the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what I said after that.
You said a lot, which of course is technically correct. Can't argue with it. And it's interesting how many times I've done that. I've asked that question to hundreds of people, and it's great in a group because you'll see, particularly a team. If you ask a team, you'll see half of the group will just turn to somebody. It's always the same person, and it's always been a man, because they go, "Oh, John will know," and they wait for John to work it out. Or what's often said is, "Oh, I'm shit at maths." The fact that it's not even maths is a different subject. But so what happens is people often answer a different question, an easier question. So can you multiply in your head 17 times 24 is a different question to what is 17 times 24. But this happens in life. people often, if you ask them a tricky question, you'll know this if you ask good questions, they don't answer the question that you've given them if it's difficult. They answer an easier question. And Kahneman's position is that the brain has these two systems, system 1, system 2. System 1 knows 2 times 2, it just answers automatically. Same as if I asked you, what's your mother's maiden name? You know, you just know it, you don't have to think about it. You know, what's your PIN number? Don't tell it, but you know it, right? All that stuff you just know. He said that's system 1. Stuff that requires you to think and to consciously, like, almost switch on a different part of your brain, that's system 2. Now, system 1, system 2 are concepts. They are not the truth. It's just an idea in order to explain how our brain works. Now, I have to tell you, I feel really embarrassed to say I've come up with an alternative idea about how the brain works, because I'm not Daniel Kahneman. And, you know, he's heroic in this field. But I have come up with something different. And I'm not claiming it's true. I'm just claiming it's an idea. It's a hypothesis because it can't be proven. And here's the hypothesis. Your brain acts like it's a skyscraper without an elevator. And so if you can imagine this skyscraper, and in this skyscraper is every single attribute of the human brain, your brain. And of course, your brain can do thousands of things, as well as multiplying 17 times 24 and getting the correct answer. It can be kind, it can be compassionate, it can be funny, it can sort out complex problems, it can care for it can make a decision about your children's education, it can engage in relationships that are different with your wife and your children and your parents and your friends and your neighbors. And, you know, you've got 86 billion cells in your brain that connect to come up with different things. You've got incredible number of different attributes that your brain has got. It's got a whole bunch of emotions that it can connect with. And it's got a whole load of memories that your brain keeps in there. It's incredible. Your brain and everyone else's brain. And the point about the skyscraper is, if you can imagine, each attribute sits in a different suite somewhere in the building, in the whole skyscraper. Those attributes that you use a lot, like being able to add 2 times 2, are on lower floors. The ones you use all the time may be on the ground floor. For you, where would you say multiplying 17 times 24 is? How many floors up?
24 comes to mind.
20. And it's you know, if you needed to do something, and so I don't know, maybe you and I decide we're going to go into business together, and we come up with, you know, what we're going to do business, but we need a name. Okay, so your capacity to come up with a suitable name for the business is somewhere in your brain. Yeah. Now, some people find that really easy to do. My friend Martin is a genius at it. But for most people, it would require some amount of effort. So you can imagine having to run into your skyscraper and climb upstairs to get to that suite where that attribute is. Takes a lot more effort. So tell me, for example, a favorite negative emotion of yours. We've all got one.
Procrastination.
Procrastination. Great. So procrastination lives in a suite on the ground floor in your skyscraper. Whereas Give me an attribute that you use rarely or never.
Attribute I rarely use. I'm going to say empathy, but I don't fully believe it as such. I'm struggling.
No, nor do I. But so what about just something you'd find really difficult to do that you'd rather somebody else did for you, if you can employ someone to do it for you?
Accept compliments.
Okay, right. Okay, nice. So for your brain, it takes far more effort to accept compliments than to procrastinate. And in truth, in reality, in our brains, you know, so if I was to give you a compliment, what happens is, so if I say to you, Pete, I've really enjoyed talking to you. I love, for example, how prepared you are to let me speak and absolutely finish before you interrupt. And I really appreciate that. So what happens in your brain is accepting that is that a neural network has been created. Now, if the next 10 guests come onto your podcast and also compliment you on exactly that, that neural network will strengthen and physically get wider. So imagine a jungle path where you can't walk, can't see anywhere, but somebody else has gone before you. It's much easier going through, following that path. But that's what happens. So the neural network gets stronger, and it takes much less effort for that idea to get through. It takes much less effort for your brain to do that job. Same as I ask you now, what's 17 times 24? The answer is
408.
You know it. It's suddenly moved. It's moved from that suite on the 24th floor down to, I don't know, third or fourth or whatever it is. And that's what I believe our brains are like that. And the point is, if you want accepting compliments to be something you have greater access to, and maybe, you know, it's not just accepting, maybe it's something more proactive. So maybe it's, so for me, for example, my favorite negative emotion is frustration. I can feel frustrated very easily in a way where it's not always appropriate. So for me, what I want to do is I want to move frustration from the ground floor up. I don't want to never have it because it's part of me and we've all got to feel frustrated at some point. But let's move it up so I don't go to it so quickly. Maybe I'll go somewhere else more quickly. And the way to bring down and move the different attributes around your skyscraper is to bring it into consciousness. Recognize where it lives, move it, and then move them around to suit you.
That's a very curious way of looking at it.
Curious? It's an interesting word.
Well, I because I have to take it into my perception, my truth, if you like, and computate it in sort of my. It's interesting as you explained it there. It's very similar to way. So I was diagnosed about 4 years ago with dyslexia and ADHD, and the way dyslexia was actually explained to me was along the lines of saying it's not that you can't read or write. It's just it's a left brain, right brain thing. It's just something you'll never do for leisure or pleasure, because I can read and I can write and that's fine. It's just something that will never be, it just takes an extra step or two to do that. So as a result, I would be below average on the reading and writing scale. However, for interpretation, for visualization, and for something else, which I can never remember, I'm above average, which actually gives me a slightly higher than average IQ. So a curiosity thing that actually is something I've then subconsciously I have manipulated my entire life to give me a skill set that adapts me for, for sort of counterbalancing those weaknesses, if you like. And I'm curious then in your model, and I say curious because, I almost want to sort of play with it a bit in my head, I suppose. The perception of how we would make things simpler or more difficult for ourselves. Is simpler or difficult probably maybe not the right word. How would you describe it?
Well, I think it's all about practice. And what we know is that doing things more frequently strengthens those neural pathways. The stronger the neural pathway, the easier it is to do the thing, and also therefore it makes other options less attractive. So, and that's why reading is such an interesting one, because they say there's an epidemic of poor readers coming through because kids have got so many other distractions. And of course, it's, the video games, for example, and TV. Well, TV is different to video games, but TV is so much more passive an activity than reading. It seems to go in and work a different way. Whereas what we know is when kids are taught to read at an early age and they learn to read and they get over that hump of it being work and something that they love to do and enjoy doing. And maybe for you, and maybe all ADHD, is the sufferer the right word, or do you want a different word?
Well, some people say it doesn't exist. No, I don't think it's suffering, because I mean, it's a bit like you were describing with your son. I mean, it's is that a disability? It can be an ability. It depends, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, with the condition, let's call it a condition. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's, and again, I don't know. This is a hypothesis at best. And the idea is it takes effort to read, and if because of the ADHD it takes you more effort, it's interesting that you were told that you would never do it for enjoyment. And I just wonder if there are any people with ADHD who have been so determined to read and read and read and read and read and do it so much that they strengthen the neural networks whereby they do it for pleasure. I'd be very interested to know.
I think, like a lot of things in life, right? It's a sliding scale. We're all a bit dyslexic. We're all a bit autistic. We're all a bit of everything. It's not, and there's a bit like physics is a live science. Is everyone says, oh, it's a hard fact. It's like, well, no, it's just unproven, or hasn't been disproven, put it that way. So I think, like a lot of things, am I dyslexic? I don't know. I mean, some days I am, some days I'm not. But also, you could take somebody who's labeled as non-dyslexic and when they're tired and they're distracted and whatever else, and they're going to do all sorts. So it's not to take away, but it is also, I suppose, just to sort of say, well, life is a sliding scale. It's not a binary, yes or no, 1 or 0. It's sometimes it's shades of in between.
Yeah, of course it is. But in the quest of personal development and personal improvement, recognizing that I I do frustration more than I would like, and I do calm, for example, less than I would like. What can I, I believe it is within our capacity to do frustration less and calm more. To what extent? Who knows? So different people have different results, but it's all about increasing our awareness of it. Stop saying, "Oh, it's the way I am," and do something about it. If you want, if you don't want to, fine. But I presume you, from what I know about you and people who listen to this kind of podcast, we're not doing it for entertainment. We're doing it to learn something. And what I believe and what I've done and many people have done who I've shared this with is change the order of the attributes, so we do more of what we would like to do and less of the things that we don't want to do. I think that's brilliant.
Can I suggest that there's a parts conflict there in what you've just said?
A parts conflict?
Yeah.
What do you mean by parts conflict?
So referring to it's there's an I and a we, okay? So you said I do frustration more than I would like to. So that's almost like a third party observation of self.
Yeah.
And then you talk about the we. So you have the near I, the far I, and the we. So it's almost like three tenses, three parts of self almost. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand it enough to respond.
I don't know. It just, I don't know. It struck me because it's actually something I tuned into earlier, but then it just came up again there. Just sometimes the way we refer to ourselves, because I think it's a fascinating concept. Yeah. So I was slightly distracted there.
It was lovely. It is that thing that I learned on this course. It's a bit like a laboratory where we're both the scientist and the rat. And we are, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I find people fascinating and I find myself fascinating, but hopefully not in an egotistical way, but it's like, to recognize, oh, I do that as I think I mentioned earlier. Oh, I didn't realize I did that. Oh, I could, I want, and going, oh, because of X and Y, that's why I do that. Oh, maybe it's, it's an evolutionary thing that I do it, because so much of our behavior, I do believe, is evolutionary. Human beings have been around for about 2.5 million years, which I equate roughly to about 165,000 generations. And 400 generations of us were hunter-gatherers. It was only 600 generations ago that human beings started farming. It was only 200 years ago, 200 that we started, or 200. Hang on a minute. Now I'm getting tired. I was going to go 18, so 20 generations ago, the Industrial Revolution started.
Hmm.
that we were in factories and offices and we went to work rather than, and only in the last generation have we been digitally savvy. So much of our behavior is dictated by our hunter-gatherer genes and conditioning. And of course, you remember the Crocodile Dundee movie, where they picked up the guy from the outback and they stuck him in New York, and it was all, and that's it was very, very funny, but that's us. We've picked up us. We're hunter-gatherers, and they've stuck us in this modern environment, and our brains haven't yet caught up in all cases. And that's why I think we the phrase I use is we're hunter-gatherers in suits with a skincare regime.
Do you know what you're capable of? Do you have a sense of it?
You said something after, do you know what you're capable of, which I didn't catch.
Do you have a sense of what you're capable of?
Sometimes, and I think sometimes I run away from it. Sometimes I find it overwhelming, and it's much easier to focus on what we know and stick in a comfort zone. I think it's an incredible question. And it's interesting, isn't it? We talk about consciousness, and I think a lot of my life, particularly I think when I was much younger, I played small. I ducked challenges. One of my, such a deep recollection. A friend, I remember, I don't know how old I was, 19, 20, 19 probably, maybe 18. A friend of mine rang me up and said, the police, the band, not the force, were playing Brixton Academy. Do you want to come? And I, back in the day, Brixton didn't have a very good PR, and I went, no, don't think so. And I so regret it. But also I think it sort of, it quite characterizes who I was at the time, where I would do things that are safe. And it goes back to that evolutionary stuff. Obviously, human beings, hunter-gatherers needed to be safe. Absolutely. And the only people who survived were people with a strong survival instinct that passed their genes on to their children, who survived and passed their genes on. Those who didn't have a strong survival instinct didn't tend to survive, cleared them out, natural selection. So I can understand having a strong survival instinct, but I feel I could have achieved so much more and can achieve so much more if I didn't empower my survival instinct as much as I do.
Is that ego or is that survival?
Ooh. Well, in order to get some clarity, let's agree what we mean by the word ego.
I'll put my hands on the table and say that I believe it is pretty much all of the conscious mind.
So all of the conscious mind is ego. So if the unconscious mind doesn't know what it's doing but wants to keep me safe from wild animals or danger, So it's interesting because egos, without understanding what it is, I have an understanding that it's negative, that it's got a bad press. And so, I see ego as in egotistic. I'm not clear on the Freud stuff because it absolutely does nothing for me. So I haven't read anything like that because I just found it bizarre. Just not attractive at all as a concept.
Let's look at this a different way. How many floors up the skyscraper is the risk-taking Nick?
So risk is
risk with benefit. Let's put it that way.
Well, okay. Well, that's the problem. Is you never know the benefit because you haven't taken the risk. You have to take the risk. Always comes before benefit. You don't get the benefit and then go, okay, I don't mind taking the risk now because I've got, I don't mind betting on the roulette wheel. It's 36 coming up. Oh, okay, I'll bet on 36 then. So I think risk is quite high up my skyscraper. And so my relationship with risk is that I wish I was less risk averse. I think I allow risk to have power over me. And yet I can demonstrate doing things that many people would find very difficult. When I launched my last program, the Work in Progress program, which I launched over lockdown, I do a lot of talk to camera, done some Facebook Live, and just do it with very little not even notes. I mean, a couple of words here and there, and just speak naturally, which isn't easy. I suppose, therefore, by definition, it's not, I don't feel it's a great risk. I'm very happy to be very open and vulnerable, personally. But there are risks, in business and so on, that I clearly haven't taken and don't feel good about for not doing it. Not going, well, I weighed it up and I decided that it wasn't worth the risk, etc. I'm not happy with, to be very truthful. Interesting that I needed a very in front of truthful, because you're either truthful or you're not.
What's truth if you want to go there? It's like
well, I think it's I think about, well,
which is a better opposing bedfellow to risk? Would it be benefit or disappointment? So risk versus benefit, or risk versus disappointment?
Are those my only choices?
Yeah.
Because you see, that doesn't sit that comfortably with me. If I was asked, if you widened it, I'm sorry, I'm going to I'll ask my own questions and then answer them. Maybe the ideal podcast host or guest.
Well, if I explain the logic slightly, the risk was identified there for me anyway. It's something you mentioned. But then you described not seeing the place, not the force, the band, as disappointing. So I'm just wondering, it's like, when, in some ways, my curiosity was, are we pain driven or pleasure driven? Well, that would sort of say, what's the better motivating factor? What I want to weigh up here is the risk of something compared to the disappointment of something not happening. Which is a greater motivator? Is it one versus the other, or the risk versus the benefit of what could happen? So which is more motivating? What could happen, or how it would feel if it didn't happen?
Yeah. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Sorry, I have an understanding of what you're saying. See how hard it is. It's not easy.
It's easy.
And the difficulty I have with it, or maybe it's even the resistance I'm having to it, is that one can't know the benefit of taking the risk. The reason I felt disappointed with the way that I've risked in the past is that I judge myself to have chosen to be safe rather than take the risk and not know what happens. And the only thing we know in there for certain is that we don't know what would happen. And that whole that deathbed thing of people only regret what they didn't do, not what they did do. I think there's probably part of that in there. So I regret not taking those things. I think if I understand the point you were making, is how can I bring regret down to a lower floor? It's not regret, risk down to a lower floor, so I do it easier. That's a different question, but by your face, it's not the question you want.
There's no right or wrong answers here. I'm curious because you use the word judgment.
Yep.
And is that not the perfect definition, if you like, of a paradigm, so to speak, or we're basically living the past in the future.
Mm-hmm.
If I do that, well, this is what happened in the past. Some of it may be true, some of it may be a wild and wonderful story that we've cooked up. So de facto, then, your future will always look like the past, and so it goes on. So the interpretation of risk is always there because it's based on past event, not future events.
Sure. I accept that entirely.
Are you pain driven or pleasure driven, would you say?
I think certainly avoidance of pain is a stronger motivator to me than receiving of pleasure.
I do think that's very common with humans in general.
Well, it kept our ancestors alive. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of a interesting rabbit hole we went down there.
Yeah. I feel a shift of energy required.
What?
I'm going to spoil myself with to make it a long question while
I chew on it. What do you see coming up for you? I mean, as as you 20 odd years in doing this and working with people and going through, I mean, and you've sort of posed this hypothesis, as you said, on the table. And do you have a visual of what it could be and how it could be interpreted? And do you think it's a platform that could, be a useful metric for people?
So that's one of my ideas, hypotheses. And I really do take a great deal of pleasure in coming up with an idea like that I think can help people. It's helped myself get an understanding, get an image of something. And particularly, we're blessed with ownership of the most complex organism in the known universe. And the irony of not being able to get our head around how complex our brain is, I find hysterical, but it is mind-blowing, and it's so incredible. And yet part of its fabric and makeup can be used against somebody. So, how we've seen, clearly what happened in the Third Reich, where somebody can manipulate people to do things that I think we can generally describe as evil. So, and we're all being manipulated and influenced all the time. The adverts that we're getting, the things that our friends are doing. I talked earlier about, what bands were cool and not cool. We're constantly, and the thing is, we're only aware a fraction of the time of what's happening to us. And therefore, the potential that we have, if we were to recognize that, and I would love this, if we could bring this earlier and earlier into people's lives, so that the negative impact would be so much less on children and teenagers and so on, and younger people. And therefore, they could live far more into their potential, maybe because they wouldn't be so risk averse, for example, or, so many of them. I mean, give an example of something that drives me bonkers to have fire in my belly. You've got me now. Cosmetic surgery. If there is not an example of something that this race of ours, of beautiful, beautiful people, does not need cosmetic surgery. Your nose is not too big. Your boobs are not too small. You are beautiful and perfect. And yet, we have these people influencing mainly young girls, but, I accept it's both genders, to go under the knife to make themselves conform to some kind of idea of beauty, which, by the way, it's not new because the cosmetic industry has been doing it forever, but they do less harm than the knife. And the stats, the thing that backs my point up more than anything else is most, and I don't know the numbers, and forgive me for not knowing the numbers, but most people, before they have a cosmetic any kind of cosmetic surgery, think they'll only have the one. I just want to have, this done, a tuck or a nose job or a bit of bone, whatever. I just need that. That's all I want. And yet, I think the numbers are something like 70% or higher of people who who've had one will go on to have more cosmetic surgery. And it's just unnecessary. And you know why it's done? Because we've produced enough doctors who've got the capacity to do that, that they tell people that you need to have it. And we've created this, there's an industry, billion-dollar industry, cutting up human beings to put them in a different shape. That is what one of the things I'd like to avoid in the future. I'd love, and I'm not suggesting, obviously, that those cases where people have severe disfigurements, or like bless Katie Piper, who had acid thrown in her face, don't do reconstructive surgery on her. Of course, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the vast majority of unnecessary, cosmetic. I just want to be a bit more this or that. Hair transplant. What's wrong with your head? It's fine. It just, it really, really impacts me. I can't bear it. Rant over.
I'll be honest and say I have several flaws with your argument.
Okay, go, lovely. Go on. Let's talk it through.
Is your son perfect?
Well, if my older son's perfect, my younger son's perfect. They're either both perfect or they're neither perfect, depending on how you define perfect. But
so it's potentially a bit of a low blow, but it's that definition of at what point does surgical input become beneficial, become whatever.
Yeah, but that's fine. He's got spastic diplegia, which is basically a tightening of the calf muscles. And one of the things that we were offered for him was to have a little nick in the tendons to lengthen the tendon. Oh, I'm not talking about that. Of course, if that will help a child walk, I'm not against that, obviously. What I'm against is, the lip enhancers and the boob jobs and the bum jobs to make your bum bigger, where it doesn't have any effect. It's because psychologically, and it's primarily young girls, they're told through the media that they're not good enough as they are. And that is dangerous. And I would use the word evil. It's self-serving. If there was no cosmetic surgery industry, there would be no need to promote that message. Why don't we promote the message that you're fantastic how you are, that everyone should look different? And that's fine. And there's no one way that's the right way. And the thing that we think is beautiful, by the way, in our modern world, is symmetry. We say somebody who's beautiful, and we go back to what makes this person more beautiful than that person. It's the symmetry. Has anyone seen the picture behind me? That's not an original, unfortunately. But Picasso knew symmetry wasn't, perfect. You can draw something perfectly symmetrical. Yeah, so what? Be okay.
But playing devil's advocate here,
let's keep going.
Well, just the glasses on your face. Why not just pick up a £10 pair of glasses versus I'm not even gonna. I don't know how much you paid for your glasses, but
a lot of money.
But why?
So they're varifocal, so that I can read and I can see, so they do different things. That's why. But equally, I get the frames are, as you can see, extremely nice. And yeah, I mean, I get that. You could take, I mean, I suppose the argument then is, why have different clothes? Why not have, we'll all have one of each shirt or top, or one pair of trousers each, because it doesn't matter. You could argue that would also be better for the world. But if I buy 2 shirts, it's not because I don't think I'm not good enough, that me being fashionable, let's take it to where my personality requires me to be fashionable because there's something wrong with me, I need to fix it. That's the thing I have against cosmetic surgery, is that it makes people feel they're not good enough.
If your voids are your values, yes, I agree. That's problematic, that you do something because you haven't, or you need whatever. No, it's curious, right? You know, it's just different perceptions, right? And you know, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one.
So much of the stuff that we're fed, I know I do a lot of work with people, and every coach will be the same, working with people's negative beliefs. And you know, our negative beliefs have such a damaging effect on our life, on our potential, on our contribution to life. And so if people didn't have them, if we can support us, create a society where there are less, I can't imagine we'll get away with all of them, but surely we need to, you know, the good guys are the people who are not creating negative beliefs in others. And the bad guys / evil are the people who produce a negative belief in someone else for their benefit. Because the brain is incredibly receptive to influence. It's one of its great attributes, and it's a downside when powerful people use it. You know, no kid is ever born racist. Those ideas are put in their head. And by some people for some reason. I don't know what they are. I really can't get my head around that. But, you know, there's a fear of otherness. I know that. And maybe that does come from evolution. You know, when we were in hunter-gatherers lived in tribes of up to 150 people. And often other tribes would be seen as enemies. They'd be fighting over the same land and so on. And so if we are used to knowing and trusting 150 people, and you look at us now, I mean, there are thousands of people I'm connected to on LinkedIn, and I don't connect with anyone who I don't know. So you go through my LinkedIn list and you ask me, who is that? Where do you know them from? I'll be able to tell you everyone, maybe a couple of randoms, but you know, but so I know thousands of people, and I'm sure many people are the same, but that's not how our brains were designed to work. And have we evolved enough to know and trust thousands of people? We don't trust thousands of people. We know them, but do we trust them?
What are your core values or soul values?
I would suggest my favorite value at the moment is empowerment. I feel very, very strongly about that. I mean, for myself and in supporting others, I think it's it's, to quote a phrase, it's the thing that gets the fire in my belly going. It's about personal empowerment, because I think as a child I didn't feel empowered. And I think it is, human beings are incredible. We're talking here, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of miles away from each other, and yet we can hear each other easily due to this incredible technology. And that was created by human beings. And if a bunch of human beings, I guess it was a bunch, created something as wonderful as Zoom, and as incredible as an iPhone, and as useful as a building that doesn't fall down, or a bridge that doesn't fall down, well, surely we have the same potential. We do have that. When we were all babies, if we lined us all up, we all had the same potential. And I think our job as parents, as members of society, is to create the environment where each of us can achieve as much of our potential as possible. So we support people with beliefs that they can be intelligent, creative, inspirational as they want to be. And then we'll discover incredible chemists who come up with incredible cures for diseases. We'll find people who'll come up with a solution to one element of climate change. You'll come up with other scientists who'll come up to problem of traffic and stuff, because I firmly believe in human ingenuity. But I also know that most of us don't go anywhere near our potential. And that seems to me to be a crying shame.
I loved what you were saying earlier. It was at 8.6 billion cells in the brain. Because previously it looked on average, I don't know who's counted, 7.2 trillion cells in the body.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing, you can, it takes 2 of those to create a new human. And any one of those cells potentially can, replicate itself, or has the contents in the DNA within it to produce another thing like it, or something maybe bigger, better, or whatever. So yeah, someone says, I can't. You're like, really?
Well, Henry Ford said it, and it's so true. Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah, no, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. How would you describe your belly in 1 or 2 words? Your fire in your belly.
Too big.
Or your fire in your belly. I don't know. I got ahead of myself there.
So I'm fascinated by people and how we operate in the general and in the particular, and what makes, so what's common to all of us, and then what's unique to each of us.
That's not 2 words.
Ask you again.
If you were to describe your fire in the belly in 1 or 2 words, what would it be?
I'm struggling. I'm struggling to put it in one or two words. The best I can come up with, and I'm not super happy with it, is people's potential.
Very interesting. I think we've covered the communication and the clarity part. Can you talk to me about the creativity part?
So when I was in school, I was maybe 8 or 9, and we were doing we were in the art class, and we were doing a painting, and remember those A-frames? So it's an easel, but it's an A-frame. So I was working on one side, another boy was working on the other side. I went to a boys' school, and I can't remember the assignment we were given, but I do remember what I put on the piece of paper. The paper was I took a crayon across it, and the entire thing was black. And I wrote a word in each corner of the paper. And I can't remember the 4 words, but if I remember, 3 of the words were sad, unhappy, and angry. Happy little chap. Yeah.
Dark.
I remember that. And I remember the teacher walking up the line and coming behind me, and came behind, looked at what I'd done, and said, "Oh, that's interesting, Nicky." I was Nicky as a little. And the boy on the other side of the A-frame picked up, stuck his head round, had a look at it, and went, "That's rubbish." And I never did anything else in art again. That was such a strong experience. And again, with everything we talked about, the influence, the opinion, the beliefs. And the belief I had, which I only worked out literally 20 odd years later than that, was I'm not creative. That's the idea I had. I'm not artistic. I'm not creative. So far bigger. And I remember I was the chair of the Parents Association in our local Cub Scout group. Boys are in Cubs. And they'd asked me to come along as a parent helper to camp. And I was, yeah, sure, happy to. And they'd got something was scheduled all the time, and the leaders were doing everything. I was just there as a gopher. And then something happened, and we had like an hour and a half that was a gap, and they didn't know what to do with them. And I don't know if I said I'll do something, or I just went and did it. But I basically entertained the kids for an hour and a half, 30 odd boys, a couple of girls, I think, from memory. And it was in that moment that I realized, I am creative. I've created something that wasn't there, some activity. I can't even remember what it was. But the idea that creativity comes in many forms. It's not just drawing and art and all of that. And to me, that creativity is that very basic thing of creating something that wasn't there before. And so, for example, the idea of the skyscraper without the elevator. that's an idea that's creative, because nobody, as far as I'm aware, has thought of that concept before. And there's other, but equally, when we talked about creating a world and reaching our potential, that requires creativity, finding a solution to climate change, to the education system, requires creativity. It requires connecting with that attribute that I believe everybody has, but some of us were damaged, damaged as children. Fortunately, I don't know who the boy was who said it, so I can't, but what I'll tell you what does worry me is how many times did I say something like that, as stupid as that as a child, or maybe even an adult, that had that kind of impact on people. And so coming up with something that isn't there currently. And so the thing that really, the program that I've come up with this, I did not come up with on my own. A friend of mine, guy I play badminton with, because that's my sport. We could talk for hours on badminton, but I think we've got better things to do. In fact, I would have been there, but I'm injured. I would have been there on a Tuesday night. But I met John playing badminton and being coached. We were both being coached by the same coach. And, got to chatting, what do you do, etc. And I said, well, I run these courses and I help people, reach their potential. And he said, oh, I love all that stuff. And I said, okay, I'll tell you the next course I've got. I had another course coming up. He said, yeah, I'd like to do that. And John was brilliant. John is brilliant because John is the person who, when he learns something, he puts it into action. He's not one of these people who goes on a course, a 2-day course and goes, oh, if I get one thing from it, it'll be worth my while. He goes, no, I want everything from it. And he takes everything from it and he's really put the stuff into action. And he really liked the concepts. That was the communication program. And a year or two goes by and he comes to me and he says, what I'd like to do is I'd like us to collaborate on a new program, because what I do, one of the things that he does is he creates idea generation programs. So there's a problem or there's an opportunity and we need to come up with an idea. So you bring your team together and do this. He says, the problem, the thing that stops it being as good as it could be, is always the people and their behavior. He said, if you could teach them your communication protocols that inhibit the bad behavior, inappropriate, the judgment, the interrupting, the stuff that doesn't, then we can both build on that, and then the idea generation process can happen. And that's what we do now. We've created this hidden solutions program, which encourages and gets teams to produce, when they work with us in a period, I don't know, a couple of hours, they can literally come up with 200 or 300 or 400 different ideas. I mean, that's not ideal because you have to evaluate them. You have to get the number down because 400, way too many to deal with. But understanding how the human brain comes up with ideas, because we often, it's all about the energy management, which is the skyscraper stuff. So we go, oh, here's a good idea. Don't you hear people say, here's a good idea, even before it comes out of their mouth? They've judged it before it comes out. I go, okay, we've got a good idea. We don't have to do anything else. We'll keep with this one. But the best idea may not be the first, or the 5th, or the 10th, or the 100th, or the 150th. It may be more. It may be the first. Sometimes it happens. very, very rarely. It's a myth.
Often people will know though, don't they?
Will know what? Sorry.
They might have 200 ideas, but they actually know when put or questioned in a certain way. That some of them are more, the certain ones have a key validity.
Yeah, the problem is that we get attached to them very quickly. We judge and we get attached, and those distort our ability to evaluate effectively, and also to generate more ideas, because you go, well, I've got the idea, this is the one, I don't have to bother with the rest, because our brain, we've only got a certain amount of energy. There's only a certain amount of things that we can focus on at any one time, and part of our brain is always monitoring our energy usage, and that's one of the reasons why those things that are high up in the skyscraper, we don't go there, because part of our brain is going, oh, no, you can't put the energy in to go up to the 19th floor. What about with judgment's on the ground floor, we'll pop in there rather than run up to the 19th floor. Wouldn't you?
The price of judgment or disappointment versus risk versus effort versus all the factors. Okay, I think we could possibly talk all night, and just a little bit mindful of your time, Tell me this, where can people learn more about you? Where can they follow you, track you down, hunt you, stalk you, any of the above?
I'm not too keen on stalking, but they're more than welcome to. So the various websites, I'm sure people will you can just Google them, you'll find them. Dynamic Coaching is my original one, .co.uk, and it will find the others, consciouscommunication.co.uk or hidden solutions.co.uk or work in progress, work-in-progress.info. But again, they'll all be on the dynamic one. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Nick Simmons 1, early adopter, got it early. Twitter, I'm at Simmonds Nick. Couldn't get Nick Simmons because I'm not the, you see. And obviously the key thing is if people want to connect because they're interested in the ideas, I'd really love to have more than just a following, maybe a connection, and see where that goes.
Powerful. Is there a final message you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Thanks for putting up with me for this long in your ears. I would suggest the final message is you and all of us are more powerful than we'll ever know, and you can choose where you direct that power.
You're here. Nick, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Ditto. Well done for you. I mean, there was a lot of things in there that I wasn't planning on saying. I mean, I didn't plan, and there was some stuff that I clarified as a consequence of your question. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, particularly for me around the risk stuff. Very interesting. I will explore that further with my coach.
That's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you.